In the past, the comparison between the KTM RC390 and the TVS Apache RR310 has been a fairly straightforward one, with a pretty consistent outcome. If you wanted a more hardcore focused sports bike, you got the KTM, and if you wanted something a little more comfortable and easier to live with, you went for the Apache. Today, that status quo is being very intensely questioned by this, the 2022 RC390. This time around, the KTM seems to be playing the Apache's game a little. It seats you more comfortably than before, the ride quality is now more plush, the engine is better behaved and it gets a whole bunch of new features. But the Apache has also received its fair share of improvements over the years, and this is the latest BTO version, complete with things like an optional kit that gives you adjustable suspension at both ends. Is it all enough to fend off the fresh Austrian challenge? You've heard it before and you'll keep hearing it till the EVs take over. There is no replacement for displacement. The Apache has always had a handicap in the engine department. A 60cc deficit means it continues to be almost 10 horsepower and 10 Newton meters down on the RC. But there's more to this story than output figures and cubic capacity. When you wring these engines out, the difference in outright acceleration is noticeable but not striking. There's just over 1 second separating the two bikes from 0 to 100 kph, and it feels that close from the saddles as well. But in the real world, the KTM's engine definitely feels meatier, and speed comes more effortlessly on the Austrian machine. The Apache can just about keep pace in most situations, but its motor does need to be worked harder. On the flip side, it's much less fussy when pulling just off idle, and it's quite a tractable motor, so it's a pleasant engine to use in the city. The slightly lower output figures also mean it's noticeably more fuel efficient than the KTM, which can become quite a thirsty machine when ridden hard. Neither of these engines are super refined, and both will feed you vibrations at different points during your ride. The KTM feels like a big single. It's thumpy at idle and judders when you try to pull hard from low RPMs in high gears. But once past about 5,500 RPM, it smoothens out considerably and remains that way all the way to the red line. The Apache is almost the opposite. It's quite smooth in the lower portion of the tacho, but becomes quite buzzy as the revs climb, and it feels considerably more busy than the KTM at a steady 100 kph cruise. Overall, this comes across as the slightly gruffer engine here. The gearbox also isn't quite as slick shifting as the KTM's, and the RR's throttle response is a little too snatchy in sport and track mode, which is a pity because these are the only two modes where you get the full 35 horsepower output. Switching to urban or rain mode restricts the power to about 26 horsepower. Both these bikes are at their absolute best when they're attacking a set of twisties. It's practically what they were built for, and neither of them disappoints you in this area. They're both agile, sweet handling machines that immediately fill you with confidence the moment you climb aboard and absolutely devour any corners you throw at them. But they do go about it slightly differently. The Apache is a very quick steering motorcycle, and it tips into corners rather effortlessly and feels very light on its feet. But once leaned over, the KTM sends you a little more feedback about what's going on at the front contact patch, and that gives you a lot of confidence when pushing hard. Tyres on both bikes are more than adequate for road use, and they remain quite grippy even in the wet. But when pushed hard at a place like a racetrack, the Michelin Road 5s on the Apache are a clear level above the KTM's H-rated Metzeler M5s. One area where there is a more distinct difference is brakes, with the KTM sporting a considerably sharper and slightly more powerful braking setup than the Apache's, which feels rather numb at the lever and requires a stronger squeeze for quick stops. The RC390's performance levels have never been in doubt, but comfort and everyday usability, those were a concern. KTM has made amends. This time around, you're seated more upright than before. It's still a more committed riding position than the Apache. There's more of a reach to the handlebars, but taller riders will appreciate the fact that this is more roomy than the TVS. The seat is also now significantly improved over the previous RC, to the point where now the size, shape and material are all nicer than the Apache's, which is why despite the more aggressive riding posture, I find this to be the more comfortable bike over long distances. The Apache seats you even more upright and the bars are placed closer to you. The seat is also lower than on the KTM, which is why overall this is the nicer bike for shorter riders. But the tank is difficult to grip with your legs and the slippery sloped seat keeps pushing you forward when you slow down. Overall, neither of these bikes is too hardcore in terms of ergonomics. Even the RR, which came to us with the race kit, which adds more tapered handlebars and higher, more rear set foot pegs. Both bikes can be used reasonably comfortably on a daily basis, as long as your commute isn't too long. Now, don't expect to go two-up touring on either of these machines, but both bikes have pillion seats that are pretty usable for short distances in the city, as long as your passenger isn't prone to vertigo attacks. The RC's pillion perch is considerably improved, and your passenger will no longer have to squat awkwardly like before. The only niggle here is that the grab rails are a little too far back. But hey, at least it has two of them. The TVS only has one on the right side, though it is well placed. One of the Apache's trump cards here is the optional dynamic kit, which gives you adjustable suspension at both ends for an extra 12,000 rupees. Now this is a very nice feature to have, and it's truly commendable that TVS has managed to price it this reasonably. But truth be told, it's the RC that rides better out of the box. And even after we played around with the Apache setup to get it working as best we could, we still felt that the KTM offers a more absorptive and comfortable ride on our roads. The window of the Apache's suspension allows it to be very composed at high speeds or for aggressive cornering, but it does feel on the firm side in everyday usage, while the KTM's damping rates are kinder and do a better job of isolating you from the road. Of course, the control and adjustability that the TVS offers will pay dividends on a racetrack, but most folks end up riding on the road for the most part, and for that purpose, the standard RR310 suspension does its job quite well. These are both recently updated machines and they pack enough bells and whistles to justify their position in the market. The Apache got a big toy chest with the BS6 update, including a Bluetooth-enabled TFT display, 4 riding modes and ride-by-wire. The RC doesn't get riding modes, but it does have 2 modes for the ABS, one where you can turn off the system at the rear wheel. And it also ups the ante with new features like traction control and a bidirectional quick shifter. The quick shifter isn't always super smooth and it isn't always super quick. It works best at high RPMs and full throttle. But by and large, it works well enough that you can use it almost all of the time, which is a great convenience. Where the TVS claws back some ground is in quality and finish levels. The materials used and the build quality across the bike are very pleasing, and it feels a notch above the KTM. The RC is quite well put together for the most part, but there are a few areas that feel a little plasticky. If you've made it this far, then you've seen that in most areas it's the KTM RC390 that has the upper hand here. The Apache continues to have its strengths and it's still a great value for money proposition. But in most key areas, it's the RC that comes out on top, including areas where previously the TVS had the upper hand. And what the KTM asks for in return is an extra 50,000 rupees over the base spec Apache and about 30,000 rupees more than this bike you see here. Is that a fair premium to command? In my mind, the answer is a convincing yes.